more than a decade, Saturdays and Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Manouk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mendel. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba.
And for all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
That a boy, Sam. That was awesome.
Alongside Sam, I'm your host, Drew Mendel, with Dave Manouk and Ezra Ginsburg as well, here for the next couple of hours to talk all about the Winnipeg Jets, everything going around in the world of hockey. Anything else you want to talk about? Nothing? Okay, get on out of here then.
Hey,
Mwah, bye. Get on.
Well, that was very wholesome, Drew.
That was wholesome.
It's funny, guys, because Drew's been doing the intro for 15 years. Sam steps in, and in 10 seconds, he does the best intro in Illegal Curve history. So
it doesn't take much.
It was very wholesome until Drew said, and I quote, "Get out of here."
But I said it in a loving way.
The truth was, Ezzy and I were both thinking the same thing, but you said it.
Dad is pipe and slippers.
Yeah. Dad needs his bourbon. Get out of here, boy. Smack. No, but anyways, yes, thank you to Sam for making an impromptu walk-on in this morning's edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. There's Dave, there's Ezzy. I'm your host, Drew, here for the next couple of hours, like I mentioned. Jets talk, not a ton this week with the Jets. I mean, it was about 6 days ago, I guess, 5 days ago, that Scott Arniel was officially introduced as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, and now we're sort of waiting for the next steps when it comes to the coaching search and the assistant coaches. And there was a good article in today's Winnipeg Free Press by our buddies Mike McIntyre and Ken Wiebe about sort of the still on the to-do list for the Winnipeg Jets moving forward in this offseason. We know the roster is still in flux, and we'll talk about that this morning here on the program. I guess my first question for you guys is your thoughts on the introduction of Scott Arniel as head coach last Monday. I thought he hit all the right notes, Dave. You were there at Canada Life Center. You were there for the media availability. What were your impressions being on site at the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I think he did. I think he talked about the things that he's learned, the lessons that he learned when he was in Columbus. Oh, Sam's back. The lessons he learned in
Sam, we'd rather have you as the host than Drew. So if you want to take over, go ahead.
No, he's not. He's just going to stand here. You can keep going.
But anyways, no. So I think I thought that was important that he talked about Columbus in a way, like a lot of folks have fixated on that. And the fact of the matter is, and the one thing that I think it's fair to say is that people evolve and they change and they learn and they grow. And so from his first experience as a head coach when he was admittedly young in his late 40s, his first time going with other young assistant coaches who are all now still remaining in the NHL. I looked at some of the assistant coaches he had. Dan Hinote, I think, was his assistant coach. Obviously, Brad Berry, who's going to be a guest on this show in the second half.
Dan Hinote, former Stanley Cup champion with the Colorado Avalanche, Dave.
Yeah, and he's still an assistant coach, I think, in Nashville. And Brad Berry, of course, UND with the head coach, and we'll be having him on. And then there's one other of his assistant coaches is also in Nashville. I can't remember who. But the point is that he took ownership of the mistakes he made. And that to me was critical. It wasn't a guy who said, well, who said, oh, that was 12 years ago, blah, 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 and glossed over it. He acknowledged that he had made mistakes. He had acknowledged
Todd Richards was the other assistant.
Todd Richards, yeah. So he acknowledged that he had made mistakes, acknowledged that he had learned from those mistakes. You read Scott Billick's article in the Winnipeg Sun talking from some of his former head coaches in the NHL, whether it's in Washington or in New York, in other spots, just talking about what he's learned clearly as in the last decade. So to me, that was the most important thing, was that he didn't just gloss over it. He spoke about it, he acknowledged it, he owned it, and then he went to the idea of, how he's going to evolve further from a team that did win 52 games last year in the regular season, but obviously special teams were a big issue. He acknowledged and took ownership of the PK struggles. So to me, you're right, Drew. I think he did hit all the right notes. And so we'll see. You could say as he hit a high note. And so I thought,
It's a good one. Also, Bobby Bugner was one of his assistant coaches in Columbus as well. And yeah, I think, look, we know Scott Arniel. We had him on recently, the 15th anniversary show. He's very well known in the city. He played for the Jets 1.0. He coached the Manitoba Moose. He's been an associate coach the last 2 years. Like, I don't think anything like, and Drew mentioned this, like I wasn't there. Neither of us were there. Dave M is our on the scene correspondent.
He's the on-site reporter. He's the guy he's the guy that we sent to all the big events.
Exactly. Except for the Rady JCC Sports Dinner, by the way. Big shout out. Had a ton of fun seeing Grant Fewer, Dougie Gilmore, and Wendell Clark, and everybody else. So got to give a shout out to our friend Zach Manouk and everybody at the Rady JCC Sports Dinner. But look, nobody should have been surprised by anything Scott Arniel said. He's a polished guy. Like, he's been around the game for a long time. And I agree with Dave. I think, it was refreshing. One of the things that stood out to me, boys, is when you've heard now from the Jets organization, I believe Zinger talked about it on the Moose end of season roundtable with you, Dave, right? Like how they're going to try to embrace analytics a little bit more in the organization in the summer.
The analytics summit, the summer analytics summit is
right. And that's important, guys, because look you could make a strong argument. There were several players who were misused under Rick Bowness the last couple of years, Nikolai Ehlers being a big one in terms of his even strength ice time and even his power play ice time, right, boys?
Yeah.
So I think that stood out to me. But look, I listened to most of the show last week, even though I wasn't on, and I think you guys touched a lot of good points. I think we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to give Scott Arniel, some time to see how he's running this team. Yeah, he was the head coach for 15 to 20 games when Rick Bowness wasn't able to be the head coach. But we're going to have to give, Scott Arniel at least a third or a quarter of a season, before we make any judgments here. I think, he's earned this opportunity. I think everybody agrees with that. Are there other candidates that could have been better? Sure. I mean, maybe a guy like Gerard Gallant, or there were some big names out there, right? Todd McClellan is another guy, right? But the Jets decided to stick with Scott Arniel based on the small sample size they saw of him as a head coach when Bones wasn't able to go, right? So we're going to have to wait and see how he does.
What I thought was refreshing there is that he did seem, to your point about the embracing of the analytics or the analytics summit, is that he's not going. It didn't sound like he's going to be willing to be typecast as a certain type of coach. He's going to embrace all the information that's available to him to try and better the team. And with all due respect to Rick Bowness, I don't know that was necessarily a strong suit of his. You get into the game of hockey for so many years and so many decades, you're less likely, especially as you're at the tail end of your career, to really embrace sort of new methods that might be put in front of you. And that's just human nature. I mean, that's just the reality of it. If you're a teacher and you're a year away from retirement, you're probably not going to be fascinated by the new far-fangled device put in front of you. You're going to go with what's tried and true and what you're comfortable with. Again,
there's for sure probably a lot of truth to that, Drew, in terms of teachers that mail it in their last year. But I would also like to think that there's teachers out there that want to end on a high note.
Of course. I'm not saying all
that,
teachers
Drew,
are
high note.
I'm just using it as an analogy.
I used high note again, Drew. Remember Danny High Note, former assistant coach under Scott Arniel?
Dave, you can't reuse the same joke. Dave already made the pun. Dave won the pun award there. You can't just steal a guy's pun and pass it off on your own.
And that's the reason Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club will never give me any mic time on stage.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But that's
most specifically is the fact that he's not allowed on the premises.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm not funny at all.
That's true. The restraining order and the lack of humor is more of the issue involved there. But I mean, that's what I think that was one thing that stood out to me and I thought was refreshing, is that, look, they're going to look at what all the teams are doing around the league. They're going to consider all the information put in front of them, and they're going to use that information as a means to try and improve the team, on an ongoing basis. And that, to me, is, I think, an area that he can probably differentiate himself from Rick Bowness. And again, this isn't necessarily this isn't intended to be an overwhelming criticism of Rick Bowness, but you do get stuck in your ways in life, and everybody does. So when there's an opportunity for a fresh pair of eyes or a fresh voice to consider new things, it's important to take that. And I thought that was a good thing that Scott Arniel said on Monday, Dave.
Yeah, and look, I just think that there is he's hungry for the opportunity, and he wants for the city to win. And that was the other thing that was conveyed in his media availability. This is the guy who took the Moose to the 2009 Calder Cup against a very good Hershey team. What a surprise. We're still talking about a very good Hershey team in 2024. But this is he's had some winning pedigree in the AHL at least. And again, to me, the focus is a guy who was drafted by the Jets in the second round, who played for the Winnipeg Jets for 4.5 seasons, who played, of course, for the Manitoba Moose, coached for the Manitoba Moose. He's invested heavily in the city as a guy who, as he said, even though he's from Kingston, he most people think of him as being from Winnipeg. Now, look, again, it's not about loyalty. I don't care. Again, the Jets could have hired someone else. It would have been the same to me. But the fact of the matter is that they went with someone who they felt could get them to that next level and could win with this group. And again, one of the questions that I asked Kelly Moore last week, and we weren't certain about this, but Kevin Cheveldayoff in his media availability talked about it. The players spoke about how comfortable they are with Scott Arniel. And now you could say, well, it's a country club, and of course they want a guy that lets them. Again, that goes a long way. That's important to know that there's a comfort of this team with this coach. So again, I think that probably plays a lot into it, right, Drew?
Well, and can I just say one thing quickly, Drew? I think to think that there's not succession plans in other organizations is ridiculous, right? Because this is a form of a succession plan, right? Dan Bilesma was the coach of Coachella Valley.
Still is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
still playing.
But he's been hired as the Kraken.
Yes, we know.
Right. So to think that this doesn't happen in other organizations is ludicrous, right? It's not just the look.
I'll see him August 2nd.
Well, no, but exactly. But look at the Edmonton Oilers. How many years they had former players in their organization, right? Craig McTavish, Kevin Lowe, Paul Coffey. Paul Coffey's still an assistant coach with the Oilers. The Oilers have
they kept hiring new head coaches.
Yeah, that are familiar with the organization, right? You look at the New Jersey Devils had Scotty Stevens behind the bench. Marty Brodeur is heavily involved on the, executive side of the organ. All organizations, bring former players back into the mix that obviously, that are, suitable for certain positions, right? So it's not just this country club atmosphere. I think Rick Bowness, when he stripped the C from Blake Wheeler, Dave, he changed that country club atmosphere a lot. I really do think that. And I think, and there's also a lot of new players that weren't around for the Paul Maurice era, right?
Yeah.
There's certain players that are, but I mean, I just think, I don't think there's as much of that at least, Dave, you're there more than I am. I'm not in the Jets room a lot or at practice, but I feel like that kind of culture has changed over the last 2 years with Rick Bowness.
Yeah,
and again, go ahead, Drew.
I do think that that's part of it. I do think that, had they gone in a completely different direction from Scott Arniel, there's still maybe an underlying bit of fragility with this group that had a new head coach come in that maybe was again trying to change the culture, or again trying to implement brand new methods that may not have been embraced wholeheartedly, that the same sort of issues could have potentially developed again. I do think that was an element involved in the decision making, in that, look, Rick Bowness and Scott Arniel to some extent built a culture that they want to now continue to grow on. Somebody brand new, you're not guaranteed, and there's no guarantees with Scott Arniel for that matter, but somebody new comes in, they might try and implement another new culture. And I do think that just sort of continuing to build on what has already been structurally put in place was important for True North, to just ensure that they don't backslide, that they don't fall back on bad habits. Now, it's no guarantee that they won't fall back on bad habits, but I think part of the thinking, of course, for True North would have to be that, look, if we still have a bit of the continuity from one head coach to the next, we're not going to see the backslide that into the porous Winnipeg Jets as they had been in years before. So I do think that was a bit of a factor in the Jets' thinking when they made this decision.
And I just want to make one more observation, because there's a conversation going on in the chat about how Columbus was a better team when Scott Arniel was no longer the coach. And Drew last week talked about how Columbus was a possession positive team under Scott Arniel. And one of the things we talked about was the goaltending. Well, in what happened when Scott Arniel, as he was no longer the coach in 12-13? Well, they had a goalie named Sergei Bobrovsky who came in and won them a ton of games. Steve Mason still wasn't very good. So I'm just saying that goaltending plays a big factor when you've already got a possession positive team, and then you have a goaltender who can actually stop the puck.
Yeah.
Guess what? That does tend to make your team a better team, regardless of who the coach is. So I just
look at Edmonton right now. They couldn't get a save through the first 20 games of the season.
Right.
Yeah.
They had to fire the coach. All of a sudden, Stu Skinner, it gets back to being at least a serviceable goaltender. I don't think he's going to be in anybody's top 10 goaltender list. And now look at where the team is. They're a game away from the Stanley Cup final. I mean,
last night was really impressive to win
good.
that game 3-1 in Dallas.
Yes.
And what did they hold them to, Drew? Like 20 shots or something?
But as it was like
Dallas. Look, I don't think that series is over, by the way.
It was 10 shots. It was 10 shots through the first 40 minutes.
I wouldn't count Dallas out in game 6. That's all I'm saying.
I wouldn't either, because I think they have a lot of pride and everything else. But the way Edmonton has managed to turn things around, I mean, look, you if you don't get saves, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the best head coach in the history of hockey or an amalgam of the best head coaches in the history of hockey. You don't get saves, you're gonna be labeled a bad coach, and that's just the reality of the situation. And that's what happened, to your point, Dave, in Columbus, is that they were all of a sudden able to get some saves the next year. They were a possession positive team before, but if you get if you let bad goals in all the time, you're not going to win games. It's not overly complicated.
Well, and I wanted to mention something here. Craig Zamzo was talking about the assistants, and I know Dave was mentioning before the show and in the chat he wanted to talk about this. I think it's going to be really interesting. I just want to throw out a couple names because I think it's going to be really interesting to see who the Jets go with as their assistants. I'm sure, guys, we could throw out like a bunch of names. I don't know if you guys saw Darby Hendrickson was let go by the Minnesota Wild. He was there for
after
about
15 years.
Yeah, and Darby Hendrickson was a meat and potatoes type of hockey player. And obviously, the roots run deep in the great state of Minnesota. That's where he's from. A lot of guys from Minnesota on the Jets, maybe a few less than a few years ago, but I'm just throwing that out there. I wonder if Darby Hendrickson is a guy the Jets look at.
Well, so in today's Free Press, Dave, the names that Mike and Ken bandy about as potential candidates to join the Jets coaching staff.
I haven't read that article, by the way, if they say Hendrickson.
They don't say Hendrickson, but they say Dave Hackstall, who, of course, was just let go from Seattle. They mentioned James Patrick. Patrick, currently the head coach of the Victoria Royals of the Western Hockey League.
Drew, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Do you guys not remember what James Patrick said? What was that a couple years ago when he was talking about with Cody Eakin? He's close with. I'm not saying, but I don't know if you guys remember that.
I do remember that. I think it was on some random podcast, wasn't it?
I'm just saying, I don't know if maybe he burned that bridge with True North. I like James Patrick, and James Patrick, I know from other people wants to stay in Winnipeg. That's why he liked the ice job. I'm just saying, I don't know if James Patrick, there might be some bad blood there. I'm not sure.
And that's a valid point. For those who don't remember, I'm going to paraphrase it. I don't remember specifically what his comments were, but they weren't complimentary towards the Winnipeg Jets organization. They weren't flattery filled to the Jets organization.
Dave, cue those comments up. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just have those handy from 5 years ago, if you don't mind.
Wasn't that long?
No, I think it was more like 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was during the Dave Lowry, when Dave Lowry was the interim head coach, if I'm not mistaken. It would have been after Maurice quit in that disaster of a season. But you're absolutely
right. It was 2020, May 9th, 2022. So not that
Okay,
long ago.
so
Well, the
yeah,
tough duck hardest hitting comment goes to Joe, James Patrick, and Mike Commodore.
they're going to be the assistant coaches. Yeah, that'll be funny. But anyways, to your point, though, you talk about the assistant coaches. It's important to bring up that Brad Lauer, who is certainly a target of a lot of vitriol for the Jets' weak power play, was let go by the organization. That announcement was made on Monday during the hiring of Scott Arniel as head coach. That Brad Lauer, which is what a lot of people were sort of as much as you don't
Calling
want to
for.
hope for anybody to lose their job, there's a lot of people who thought that was a target-rich environment for the Jets to see improvement next year. We know that the goaltender coach is Wade Flaherty. Sorry, his name just went right out of my
Did you
brain
mention
there.
Marty Johnston is back?
Yeah, Marty Johnston, Wade Flaherty, they're going to be returning. We don't know about Matt Prefontaine. The Jets have sort of been circumspect about his future. He's the video coach. So there's obviously an opportunity for
just
another.
to be clear, nobody asked about Matt Prefontaine.
Well, no,
Murat asked the communication staff.
Did anybody ask about Pat LaFontaine?
They did not. But the point is that nobody asked about Matt Prefontaine until Murat did after the press conference had ended. And he asked the communications. Well, they're not the coaches, or the GM. So
but they haven't answered.
Sure. I mean, I'm
just
saying it's important to add clarity that it wasn't when you're saying they're circumspect. It's not because. Right. Again, just to be clear, there was because
the PR staff has been circumspect. How about
there
that?
You go. That's
not Scott Arniel himself.
Yeah.
But there's a spot on the Jets bench for obviously another coach to come in, likely to run the power play. That seems like that would be the area that they would be involved in. And that's an area for the Jets where you have to be looking for improvement next year, because how many times in the course of the 82 post-game shows that we did this past season, 82 regular season post-game shows, 87 altogether, did we talk about the special teams were the cause of a Winnipeg Jets defeat? Now, Scott Arniel owned the shortcomings of the penalty kill because that was his bailiwick, but the power play, look, the Jets power play.
What is this, 1930, Drew?
I'm going to go do the Charleston on the top of a flagpole in a couple minutes as well. We're going to the hops. We're going to the sock hop with my wife and then to the drive-in afterwards.
Feathers, Drew. That's poppycock.
The point is, if the Jets get the power play back into the top half of the NHL and everything else stays equal, and that's a big if, of course, then this is, that's a real area for the Jets to potentially improve upon. So that's why I think you're going to be looking for somebody who's got a lot of expertise and a lot of, interesting, positive thoughts when it comes to the power play for the Jets moving forward next year.
Yeah, I think that there's no question that the assistant coach or associate coach or whomever that role is going to be an important one for this club. And Drew, you're right. And that's one thing we've focused on significantly throughout the course of the season. The Jets were terrible on the special teams, and they're too good a team, especially on the power play, to be where they were. You're not a bottom 10 team in terms of power play specifically, as with the weapons that they had available to them. And it's too little too late to say, oh, well, we figured it out towards the end of the season. Wow, you improved from 26 to 21. You still were in the bottom. No. And, we said
the goal has to be, Dave, to get into the top 10 at least.
But even,
your goal.
Remember this year, I mean, had this Jets team just simply been a 10 to 15 team, Ezzy, in special teams, it would have translated to.
They could have had 120 points.
Easily, because we know how many games were there. Think of that Chicago game they ended up losing, like that they had, 4 or 5 power play opportunities that they just weren't able to generate anything. And so that to me is where you're going to look to see a coach. Now, look, Brad Lauer came in as a power play, obviously it's junior hockey with the Edmonton Oil Kings, which were a very good team when he was the head coach. But the fact is that you need someone who's got some sort of proven record in that regard.
Right.
And who's looking for an opportunity. So to me,
what about Alain Vigneault? I saw his name in the chat. Like, is that ship sailed with Alain Vigneault in Winnipeg? I'm not sure. It's just another name that came to my mind.
But didn't I think Ken spoke with him? Ken or Mike spoke with him for an article in the Free Press, if I recall correctly. And he basically said, I think that his coaching career is come to an end. I'm sure he does a little bit of consulting or he does a little bit of scouting, but I think he's living the good life coming off the golf course. I think he's taking the Florida golf tour while Kenny takes the Manitoba golf tour, and the Florida golf tour might be a little bit more enjoyable in come mid-February than getting on a charter to go from Minnesota or to go from Winnipeg to St. Louis or something.
Yeah, so maybe Vigneault's not an option, but I agree with Dave. Like, I don't think you want, all due respect to Brad Lauer, I don't think you want a rookie assistant coach. No. I think you want a veteran and another guy. Did Mark Crawford not play with Scott Arniel as well? I'm not sure if Mark Crawford is, somebody that's on the radar. Guy Boucher, guys, is another guy. He's been rumored. He might be an assistant with the Montreal Canadiens under Marty St. Louis. I'm just saying, again, you're bringing these guys in to be an assistant coach, not a head coach. So you want them to focus solely on the power play, basically, not just the power play, but that'll be a big part of it, right, Dave? It's such a big part of look at the Oilers right now. The Dallas Stars can't buy a power play goal. And Drew's right. Stuart Skinner deserves a lot of credit for that. But the players in front of Stuart Skinner deserve a lot of credit as well.
25 straight, as they've killed.
25 straight kills. So the power play is important. The penalty kill is important. That's nothing new. Those special teams have always been a big part of hockey. All I'm saying is I think that who the Jets bring in as the associate or assistant to replace Scott Arniel is going to be crucial. And that's why I agree with Dave. It's got to be somebody with a lot of NHL experience.
Let's go to break. I see Paulie Edmonds is getting ready backstage to join us. He's going to join us after the break. Saturday morning, Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show rolls on. Bottom of hour number one. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you, and we're thrilled to welcome to the program the one, the only, the voice of the Winnipeg Jets on 680 CJOB and Power 97. Paul Edmonds joins the program. Paulie.
You look good, Paul.
Buddy. How are you?
Paul,
You're looking
like
good.
Lost
right.
Weight, I would know that because I've gained weight.
I love when Drew, you love doing the Power 97 thing. Hey, you always kind of wanted to be like an afternoon FM rock jock, didn't you? Hey?
Oh, you know me. I'm so little. You have no idea
Paulie, Jay Richardson's job is safe. He has nothing to worry about here.
No, I'm good. I'm busy doing a few things work related, but also trying to get some things done around the house and be involved with my kids who are still actively involved in sports. And we've got a few years left of that. And then it's all going to be gone. And we're going to be looking at each other going, what happened? Like, where did it all go? But glad to have a morning with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. I won't comment on the fact that it appears you've been banished into some sort of shack or shed in the corner of your property.
Are you is that Lac du Bonnet?
Well, a little east of there. Yeah.
Yeah. That area. Yeah. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
There you go. Anyways, Paulie, thrilled that you're able to join us, talk about everything going on with this Winnipeg Jets team. Let's go back to Monday. Scott Arniel officially introduced as the Jets head coach. We were talking about it to start the program this morning. And the sort of general consensus that we had is that he hit all the right notes when it came to the winning the press conference, as the old expression goes. Contrition for what happened in Columbus and how it wasn't his best performance, but how it made him a better person, made him a better coach, and he's excited about the opportunity to build upon that. What were your sort of general takeaways from Monday's introduction?
Yeah, same thing. A couple of key points was he was rather candid when he talked about the aftermath of Columbus 12 years ago, right? Like he said I think the quote was, it was a dark time in my life, right? Mm-hmm. And that's quite revealing, and I guess there was a lot of second guessing as to whether he was a good coach or whether he could do this, because that's what he wanted to do. And he got the opportunity, and it only lasted a season and a half. And then he talked about how important it was, and somewhat with me afterward, getting involved with Lindy Ruff in Buffalo, and how Buffalo and the New York Rangers and Washington, and then 2 years with Winnipeg, helped reshape him. He talked about rebranding. There was words that were used in that reference as well. And from that standpoint, he kind of learned how to be a better communicator, not as harsh with people, understanding tone, communication, the X's and O's. He talked a little bit about absorbing more analytics in that presser as well. Talked about the other thing that kind of hit home for me was improving the standard, or increasing the standard of leadership and the culture in the room and the success that the team has had. So you're right. He won. That's a great word. He won the press conference that day, and he was contrite. He took responsibility. He talked about vision. So it was great that he mixed a little of the past, understanding where the future might be with this team. But there's no doubt in my mind that he was not only the right guy for the job, he was the only guy for the job. And that was corroborated, I think, when Kevin Cheveldayoff, who didn't talk a lot during the presser, guys, but did say that during the exit interviews at the end of last month, that the players to a man felt that Scott Arniel, if there was going to be a change, was the guy that they wanted.
Paul, how much importance do you place on the stability that Scott Arniel offers, considering that there could be some serious turnover on this roster, right? Like, you know, we expect a guy like, there's a good chance Sean Monahan re-signs, for example, but we're not sure, right? I think a lot of people expect Tyler Toffoli to test free agency and go play with another team next year. Again, this is all speculation. The Jets could sign Toffoli. I could be 100% wrong. I'm a Jets outsider. I always mention that, Paulie.
If you had to bet on something, bet on Ezzy being wrong. That's
exactly
true in all walks of life across all questions.
Well, Paulie, I famous on the old flagship station TSN 1290 when Todd Richards took over for Scott Arniel. I famously picked him to win the Jack Adams that year, and he was fired 10 games into the season. So I mean, like, I something like that. So I looked really bad there. So I think Scott Arniel both share that it was a dark time in our lives, right? But all seriousness, though, like Dylan DeMello, Brendan Dillon, these guys, they could test the free agency come July 1st. I obviously would love it if both these guys re-sign, but there's the reality that, you know, the Jets have a guy like Billy Heinola who's ready for the NHL. So what I'm saying is there could be a lot of turnover, not just with the forward group, but I'm not even talking about Laurent Brossoit, right? Like the Jets could lose as many as half a dozen guys off of their starting lineup next year. So how important is that for you to have a guy like Scott Arniel that's in place now, and he's going to be able to weather that storm and move forward with, you know, some of the new faces that the Jets bring in?
Truly important. I think from a couple different aspects. Number one, when you looked at the Jets in training camp last year compared to the first year under Rick Bowness and the new coaching staff, last year there was no more learning. There was no more different systems. They just kind of grabbed the ball and ran with it to tweak the things that they wanted to do to be a better defensive team. I think that is applicable this year as well from the system standpoint, because Scott Arniel has had his fingerprints over all the systematic ways that the Winnipeg Jets want to play, whether it's defensive zone entries, whatever it is, specialty teams, and they need to improve, of course, and he touched on that. But also when it comes to Scott Arniel, if you're on the fence as an unrestricted free agent and you think you want to come back to Winnipeg, you know what you're going to get. There's no fear of the unknown of going to a different organization or playing for a different coach. A lot of guys, that might sway somebody. That might sway Sean Monahan or those couple of defensemen that you talked about in the Dillons. They might say, you know what? I want to play for Scott. I really enjoyed playing for Scott the last couple of years. He wasn't in the head coaching role, but I can see him as a good head coach, and I want to stay here because of that. So it's all of these little intangibles that you kind of either factor in or don't factor in because you don't think about them. That's what's going on with these guys in their camps and their agents when it comes to signing or re-signing, maybe with a franchise like Winnipeg. And so from that standpoint, I think it's invaluable for the Jets to have this. Scott, to me, was always the heir apparent. Now, I know they did a bit of a tire kick on a couple of other candidates, but he, as I mentioned in my first answer, was always the guy. So I think it's important when you have that continuity to kind of move forward, both systematically and also understanding what he wants and the kind of personality that your head coach is going to be. And if everything's congruent that way, then you say to yourself, hey, we really liked Winnipeg. We made a home here for the last few years. Let's give it another shot. I really like the direction of this team, the organization. It's a great room. I'll sign here for a couple more years. So I think there is an advantage to the Winnipeg Jets right now in signing some of those unrestricted free agents at July 1st or before. You certainly want to get that done, but I think that it does help for sure to answer your question, Ezzy.
Yeah, continuity is I think I use the word stability. I think continuity is a better word, Paulie.
Indeed. I mean, when you see structures and organizations that are falling kind of apart, it's because they've had this whirlwind of people in and out constantly. You can't develop anything that way. And the one thing that Winnipeg has been pretty structured and pretty sound when it comes to who's kind of got their hand on the tiller. And this is no escape from that. There's no departure from that when it comes to Scott Arniel. And like I said, the biggest endorsement came from the players in their exit interviews with Kevin Cheveldayoff at the end of the season and at the end of last month. So I think from that standpoint, they're trying to build on that. And that's the other thing, too. You hit the ground running again this year. You're building off of that 52-win season, right? And away you go. Now, the building blocks for that are, sure, would you like to win 53 regular season games? Of course you would. But in saying that, I think the next step for them is, how do they get past the first round? You know, we know we're good enough to make the playoffs. That's step number one. Step number two is, how do we accelerate our game when it comes to the postseason?
Well, Paul, some of maybe how they'll get those extra wins and change things up is better special teams. We expect, we know that Brad Lauer and the team mutually agreed to part company last weekend. That's one of the things Kevin Cheveldayoff talked about. And Scott Arniel in his presser on Monday spoke about his phone blowing up in terms of the folks who are potentially interested in being either an associate or an assistant coach. From your perspective, and it's interesting because you talked about how this was a very narrow search for a head coach. Really, it was, Kevin Cheveldayoff said they spoke to 3 people in a significant fashion and maybe some others in a more general way. But from your perspective, just how wide a net are they casting? It seems like it's going to be wide, but also just how significant is the roles these decisions are going to play in terms of getting this team to that next level we just talked about?
First off, to Brad Lauer, he was a real good lieutenant for a couple of years for the Winnipeg Jets. I watched the way he and Scott Arniel interacted all the time. And I also watched the way that he dedicated himself to the power play for the last couple of years, especially this past season when it was below where it really needed to be, of course, with the units and the players and the skill set that you had. He worked hard at it. It just didn't work for him for whatever reason. David, I'm kind of fascinated to see which direction they go in replacing Brad and then adding another assistant coach. Are you going to get into somebody that is tried and true, that's a bigger name that might be on the market, a former head coach wants to come in, be an associate? I don't know. Or are you looking for somebody that maybe is young and up and coming and go that route? I'm not quite sure which way they're going to go, but I'm certainly interested in seeing the final result on who they select. Maybe it's a little combo platter of somebody with more experience and then somebody younger as well to bring along, kind of like Marty Johnston, but have 2 younger guys, because you're always looking for input from the nouveau side of the game and a new perspective and somebody that can also relate with the players, might be a little closer to their age. That's always important. But the specialty teams, I think the first and foremost thing that you're looking for on this resume, or the criteria of hiring these 2 new assistants, have you run the power play? And if you have, and that's number one, how successful has it been? Mm-hmm. And what are your ideas with it? Let's look at some film at the Winnipeg Jets in the power play. Maybe the assignment is, here's some clips, here's some film. What would you do differently here? And then have these guys come and bring that as part of their notes packages when they interview, whether it's on the phone or in person. Same thing with the penalty kill. And let's not forget that the penalty kill was tied to running the defense. I'm not so sure that that's going to happen again, because Scott Arniel has stepped out of that role in managing both. But I would like to think that maybe if you're running the defense again, you're probably going to have one of the specialty teams and likely the penalty kill, because it's so important to have the right combination on the back end when you're killing penalties. So again, fascination for me on which way they go with this. Young, old, mix of both, experience, especially on the power play, how it's going to look. That's the last thing I'll say about this is, we can talk about the power play and not being very good until the cows come home. But when you look at structure of all the power plays, it's pretty simple. Everybody runs the same power play. There's not a lot of reinvention of the wheel here. It's just maybe who you have in those spots and how you can get those guys to buy in. One of the things, we saw this past year was a little bit more play into that bumper spot, right? Get it into that slot area. I wonder if that continues. Are they going to maybe encourage Josh Morrissey to bomb it from up top more like Dustin Byfuglien used to do? We saw certainly Colorado would be a good example of that, getting those shots through for deflections in front of the net.
Those high tips killed.
They scored a boatload of goals
Yeah.
on the Jets in that series. So I'm really interested, again, to repeat myself, to see how this unfolds and who's really got their hands on the wheel when it comes to kind of figuring out a few little more hijinks when it comes to the power play, for sure.
4 defensemen on the power play next year. That's going to be the revolutionary idea. 4 defensemen, 1 net front presence. They'll never know what hit them. Paul Edmonds, our
4
guest.
Ian Lowry in the middle.
There you
Net
go.
in front.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Paul Edmonds, our guest, Saturday morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Paul, one of the sort of the bigger takeaways out of Monday's press conference was the idea about this analytics summit that's going to take place this summer. You know, do you think that's a sign that Scott Arniel is not? And I don't mean this to sound negative, but maybe more open-minded than Rick Bowness was to consider all new methods of bettering your team, taking all new evidence that could potentially help gain an advantage than Rick Bowness was in his tenure?
Drew, that's what it sounded like to me, that there was an absorption of analytics within the coaching ranks with the Winnipeg Jets, but Scott would like to expand that.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you're going to take that information and run with it. It's just, okay, what kind of extra information do we have here when it comes to maybe putting people in a different scenario, in a different spot, or pairing somebody up together, whether that's a couple of forwards or defensemen. And certainly, or how do we match up, as a pre-scout against that line? I want to keep my D pair away from that line because analytically they just haven't really worked out. It doesn't show the math being very favorable for us. So I found that to be interesting. And let's face it, analytics in a push that's come into the game in the last 10 or 12 years, it's not going away. Mm-hmm. And the more that we delve into this, the more refined it can get with the math, right? I mean, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I'm not a huge analytics guy. I have worked toward understanding more of it and making it applicable to some of the things that we do, or some of the things that we kind of go with the eye test, that we complement with the eye test. But overall, I thought it was interesting that he revealed that, and that they're going to have, as you mentioned, quote unquote, this summit this summer. And I think it's just kind of a bit of a bear pit session, guys, getting a bunch of hockey guys together, newer guys that really understand the analytics and understand that it's part of the game now in how you're planning or pre-planning. And let's see what we've got here. So I kind of applaud it from that standpoint. Let's see where it goes, because I'm sure guys like Murat Atesh, who are very analytics driven, are going to ask more questions about that, knowing that that's being discussed within the coaches' offices when it comes to a pre-scout, pre-plan, or whatever it is, and how they're going to roll out their team and who's playing against whom.
Paulie, you don't have to focus too much on analytics. That's why you've got Mitchell Clinton. He can tell you the expected goals and the inner slot shots and everything like that. The Corsi. Mitch is I listen on CGOB. That's why Mitch is always getting in those numbers for you there. But
sorry, let me just interrupt for a second, Ezzy. I mean, I'm sure you saw it too, Paulie. I don't know if you guys saw the clip, Mike Kelly with Gretzky talking about 87.
Oh, that was great.
Canada Cup,
yeah.
About the inner slot passes, the setups that Gretzky had during the 3 games against Russia earlier this week. It's a fantastic clip. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's available on all over social media. If you just want to sort of a walk down memory lane of Gretzky at his absolute prime and some of the best hockey ever played. I assume you saw it, Paulie.
I did see it. And what was intriguing about it was that the eye test matched the analytics, even going back to 1987, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where it comes in, that what you're seeing is actually what's being played out from the math world of the game. And being a baseball guy, I mean, this came into baseball a long time ago in the form of cybermetrics, right? And
Bill
so
James.
From that standpoint, it just got extended into hockey. But, I think the Moneyball aspect of not looking at batting average and looking more at runs scored and on base percentage was something for me that I started looking at when it came to how players play or how good they are getting on base, and the percentages of increasing to score runs when you get on base, right? Same thing is transferable, I think, to hockey in a different way. And that's what we've seen certainly in the last decade or so. So to ignore it would be folly. And that's why I think it was important for Scott Arniel to mention that at the presser on Monday, that his coaching staff was going to look at more analytics and dive deeper into it.
Does Dave Justice play hockey? I'm not sure. Maybe the Jets can sign him to a contract. I'm not sure. But the Moneyball reference, right, Paulie? But no, I wanted to ask you something, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. I don't know how much you've been watching of the Oilers Stars series or the Hurricanes. Hurricanes. The Rangers Panthers season. Yeah, Hurricanes were out in the second round, unfortunately. But just watching the conference finals, like, is there something that's caught your attention in terms of what the Jets can learn? And I realize that, this question always gets floated around. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, have better goaltending, have a superstar forward on your team, right? All the jokes aside, but is there something that stood out to you that the Jets can learn? Because like you said, I mean, this Jets team is not starting from square one. This was a 52-win, 110-point team that, let's be honest, ran into a couple superstars in McKinnon and Makar, and Nichushkin and Rantanen weren't too bad either. I would throw in Lehkonen. I mean, they ran into a really good team. So I think it's been overblown a little bit that, I think it was more so how well the Avalanche played as opposed to how poorly the Jets played. That's just my opinion. But what do you think the Jets can learn from maybe a team like the Edmonton Oilers or a team like the Florida Panthers, watching them in the conference finals?
Well, let's take Florida for starts. And I mean, they can wrap it up here and maybe get home and get cooled and stay and watch to see if it goes to a game 7 in the Western Conference final. Although, based on what we saw last night from Dallas in that second period, it might not get back to Dallas. But let's deal with Florida first. Florida has learned to win and win at this time of year. I mean, you go back to that first round series last year against Boston and coming back to win it. I mean, that has really propelled them all the way through. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little surprised that Paul Maurice was not one of the top 3 guys when it came to the Jack Adams selections. I mean, yeah, you get in by 1 point last year, and then you damn near win your division. And here you are again. I know all the voting is cast before that, but Paul Maurice has done an exceptional job with that team. There's no question about it. But they play gritty. They are hard to play against. That's my takeaway, Ezzy, is how nasty the Florida Panthers can be with a great mix of talent. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk, Lomberg, Sam Bennett, and I repeated myself certainly over the years. I can't understand how Calgary just kind of cast him away. This is a guy that is built for this time of year. He plays hard. He's got some skill. He goes to the net, not afraid to finish his body check on you, whether it might be a little dirty or not. Certainly will stand up when he needs to be counted. There's a lot of those guys on Florida. Florida has a
Sam Reinhart as well. Even though Sam Reinhart's a 50-goal guy, he's a gritty player.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, Alexander Barkov plays like that as well. And he's your captain and your ultimate leader. I mean, there's a real good team there. And they've, like I said, learned to win, but they play with a bite that I don't think that you're seeing with the Rangers right now. And I'm a little bit disappointed, certainly, with the way the Rangers have played the last couple of games. But Shesterkin's also holding them in. Like, there's been no goaltending problem with the Rangers. He's holding them in. But every time the Rangers want to have a push, there's Bobrovsky to make a great save. And I just don't see Florida relinquishing any part of this lead in this series. In fact, I think they wrap it up tonight. And as I said, sit and get cooled for a couple days to see what happens between Dallas and Edmonton. And the same thing with Edmonton. You bring Corey Perry in. We all know Evander Kane and the way he plays. The emergence of Evan Bouchard in these playoffs. And then, I mean, they're so hard to handle. Like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins with a couple of goals yesterday and on the power play. That second period was a disaster for Dallas last night. And at home, like that's the shocking part for me. And Dallas has a little bit of that grit to them. We didn't see a whole lot of it until the third, but it was too little too late last night. So I think the one takeaway is when you get, and we hear this from the players, we heard it from the Jets, the further you go along, the more commitment you have to take to getting run through the boards, somebody trying to chicken wing you, whatever it is. And he can argue this till the cows come home. The game is called differently at this time of year than it is certainly in November, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the commitment and sacrifice that you have to make to get to the Stanley Cup. That's why it's the hardest trophy to win in sports. And the teams that are prepared to do that are rising to the top right now. And if Winnipeg can kind of learn something, it's that maybe they need a little more grit on that top six. Maybe one player like a Nichushkin, because he was hard to handle defensively for the Winnipeg Jets. And the Jets didn't have that to counteract him when it came in that series against Colorado. And certainly understanding what it takes to win at this time of year. So I'm sure everybody's looking from the Jets' perspective on what it is that's the secret sauce for these teams like Edmonton to almost get through the conference and into the final, and certainly holding all the cards for Florida going into that game tonight.
And Paul, it's funny because the question I'm going to ask you is about integrating young players, because that's one of the things that Scott Arniel was asked about. And as a former Moose coach, he knows about the AHL and the importance of guys, whether they're guys who are the tweeners or the prospects. But, and you can look at Dallas, like Logan Stankoven and Wyatt Johnston, two guys who are very young in their pro careers, but doesn't look like it based on what they're doing in the playoffs. Those guys are the ones who are having a big impact for Dallas, not necessarily some of their veteran guys. But from your perspective, how important is that going to be to integrate guys, whether it's a Brad Lambert potentially for next year or an Elias Salamonson or someone? We don't know what some of these guys are capable of doing yet, and we'll see. The training camp is going to be the big test. They'll have a month to kind of display that. But from your perspective, did Scott Arniel kind of say the right things? And obviously Cole Perfetti is another guy who's relatively young as a 2020, but still, he's obviously got a lot of veteran games, a lot of games under his belt. So from your perspective, that sort of integration of the youth into a team that, is going to need it next year.
It amazes me, this Dallas Stars team with Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven, given the right circumstances, they could be playing in the Memorial Cup still. You know what I mean? They could be overagers, right? But they're in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I understand that. The absorption of younger players, Scott Arniel touched on that on Monday as well.
Yeah.
And he said they're imperative to have on your roster in the National Hockey League now. Number one, because these kids are so skilled coming up at 19 and 20 and 21 years old now that they're hard to keep off your roster. But based on you're jumping through the hoops on the salary cap, you need those lesser paid players, especially when you have, your upper echelon players that are making multiple millions. You don't really have a bourgeoisie anymore, and you need those young guys to come in and play for, $900,000, $700,000, $1 million. It's just the way it's structured. He talked about that. So he's understanding what it takes to build your roster to make sure that you're cap compliant as well, but also understanding that these guys are knocking on the door. David, I think that Brad Lambert is a lock to make this team next year. And the reason for that is the year
I've been saying that too, Paulie. I've been so impressed with him, but continue on. Yeah.
Well,
change your opinion immediately, Paul, is what you need to do. You have to immediately change your opinion.
Only because of
he's really good.
Yeah, he had a great year at the American Hockey League.
Yeah.
Every time he's come up and played with the Jets, whether it's been a preseason game or game 82, he has impressed. The skating ability alone. And I just think that going from major junior to the AHL this past season, and now the next leap is to the National Hockey League. I think that Brad Lambert, whether they put him in the middle, and again, it comes back to Monahan or whoever might be your center, I think to start him out over on the wing might help his progression and certainly help the Winnipeg Jets. But to answer your question succinctly, Scott Arniel understands the importance of integrating young players, and especially with some of the ways the Moose really kind of kickstarted their second half of their season, and the guys that drove that, and Brad Lambert was one of them. Salamonson, I think they got to get him over to North America here, and he needs to have a little seasoning, certainly at the American Hockey League. But based on the year that he had and where he is in his age, the track and the progression for him is right on where they want him to be. But the Winnipeg Jets, I think you'll see some young guys, and maybe Ville Heinola cracks the lineup. Billy was going to make this team, man. He not have broke his leg in that preseason game at the start of this season. So, he would love a repeat of that, not the leg breaking, not the fracture, of course. But he would love to have a training camp like he had, and he pushes in. So there's going to be some young guys knocking on the door. There's no question about it. And the last point that you talked about, Cole Perfetti, great quote. He was down in Saginaw. Of course, that's his old stomping grounds in Major Junior Hockey, and they've been the host for the Memorial Cup. And his quote was, I played my best hockey under Scott Arniel when he had taken over in the interim this past season for Rick Bowness. So that's quite an endorsement again about a young player who's 22 years old, looking forward to the coaching change because of his relationship with Scott Arniel. So watch for Cole Perfetti, I think, to not have a breakout year because he already had that this year, but even build on what he already did offensively last season, which was quite impressive for the time that he did play because he was a healthy scratch at times.
Let me end the interview with this question then, Paulie. You mentioned that you think Lambert's going to make the team. What domino effect does that have vis-a-vis Nikolai Ehlers and his future with the Winnipeg Jets?
Well, I mean, he only has 1 year left, right? And the ability of Nikolai, if the Jets retain him, is that he can play either side. And so, he can play left, he can play right. So he's interchangeable that way because he's valuable in mixing and matching. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know. It was interesting at the exit interviews. Nikolai was non-committal to his final year in Winnipeg. Let's just say that. He didn't say trade me. He didn't say anything like that, but he was non-committal to anything going forward. He was very, in a word, ambiguous or vague, right, about his future here. So I wonder what's going on behind the scenes, but I wouldn't be surprised if Winnipeg was maybe lighting up the phones and trying to see what would be available if they moved Nikolai down the road, because there's still a year left on his contract at a very reasonable $6 million per. And if it's a good spot for him, then you run the guarantee, or you can, of him re-upping with your organization. And if Winnipeg does move him, what is that for? Is it a first-round draft pick before the draft? Is it a defenseman? Is it another forward? Is it prospects? Is it a package of all of that? I'm not quite sure. They'll sort that out. But even if Nikolai is still part of this team next year, and he would certainly make the team better, I still feel that there is a spot somewhere for Brad Lambert on that top six role, or that second line, playing with Nikolai or Sean Monahan. That wouldn't be a bad line, would it?
No, and what about Paulie? Considering that Lambert is a younger player, what about if you start him on the third line and you've got Adam Lowry, Nino Niederreiter, and Brad Lambert? Like again, I know that kind of takes away a little bit from it being that kind of identity grind line. I'm just saying, like, even if it's not top six, it's the idea is that you find a space for him in the top 12, right? And I agree with you. I'm not a pro scout, but I mean, I've been so impressed. Dave watches the Moose more than anybody, and every time I've watched him play with the Moose or the Jets, like, the guy is just, his speed and skill, like you mentioned. It's not a question of if he's going to make the NHL. It's just a question of when he's going to play full time in the NHL. So I think whether he's in the top six or not, I think he's made his case to be in the top 12, right?
I think you could make a case, if you don't feel that he's ready for a top six role, to put him on that line, say with Nino and Lowry, and we're just kind of spitballing here.
Yeah.
And say you're going to get the grind that you need and that you want from that line, and the matchups from Lowry and Nino. And then you're going to add a little bit of offense with Brad Lambert, right? It wouldn't be a bad thing to have your checking line have the ability to score more. So there's a possibility of that, Ezzy. But I think that his real role would come as
top
a second
six
line center.
Yeah.
Or, pardon me, as a second line top six player. I mean, you could still get away with it if you played him on a third line and him be on your second power play unit, right? He would get more ice time there and get to kind of show off his skill set. But I do believe that you want to put those types of players in the right spot to succeed. And having a guy like that on a checking line, I don't think, to start his career in the National Hockey League, is exactly where you want to put him.
It's Paul Edmonds, the voice of the Winnipeg Jets on Power 97 and 680 CJOB. Are they biting? Are the fish biting yet?
Well, it poured rain here, and now the sun's come out. So I'm going to go out a little bit later and try to pitch some shorelines for some bass. Yeah, we'll see. The walleyes haven't quite spawned here. The water temperature is still pretty cold. So we'll see what happens today. But I'm just going to enjoy my day.
Enjoy your day, Paul. We always appreciate your time and insight. Send that invoice to Dave Minuk. We'll get that paid 5 days after never. But we always appreciate it nonetheless.
Enjoy God's country, Paulie.
PO number. Yeah,
exactly. We still got it on file. Thanks, Paul. Be well, buddy. There he goes, Paul Edmonds, joining us this morning. Always great to catch up with the voice of the Winnipeg Jets on the radio dials. We head to break. When we come back, more Jets talk. Brad Berry knows Scott Arniel very well. He joins us at the bottom of hour number 2.
He knows you really well too, Drew.
Apparently he knows me as well too. He responds to our text messages. As far as I'm concerned, that's a victory for us. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show rolls on this Saturday morning.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whitened my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go...
We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs, from restorative to cosmetic dentistry, and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
It's all over, folks, and the run has come to an end.
You'll be so far away.
A Canadian team hasn't won the Cup in over 30 years.
And the Cup will stay south of the border.
Maybe it's time we try something different. This playoff season, let's cheer with the fans we've always cheered against. Team up for the Cup at Boston Pizza.
Hey Winnipeg, Wendell Clark here. I'm coming out there May 28th for the Rady JCC dinner. Myself, Dougie Gilmore, Grant Fuhr. Some good storytelling about Winnipeg beating us up when we used to come there. See you there.
We did it again!
You're on fire, man.
There's power in a handshake after a great game or great deal. It shows professionalism and respect. Two qualities Zappia Group Realty take pride in. You don't build a business where 95% of your clients are referred by others without honesty, integrity, and total dedication to client satisfaction. To sell your home for more in less time, shake hands with Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Get started at ZappiaGroup.com.
Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg. Clearly, I forgot to remove the Rady JCC ad from the commercial breaks, but nonetheless, that gives
We're just getting people ready for the 2025 dinner, Drew.
That's right. The 51st edition of the Rady JCC dinner. We're a little bit ahead of the game, but at least it gives me a leaping off point to talk about just how great that night was, as he mentioned it earlier. Nice to see so many people come up to yours truly and Ezzy and Dave, and so complimentary of Illegal Curve. That was so nice to hear. And our good friend Matthew Leibel did a great job, of course, in his role as the MC and the interviewer. And Wendell Clark and Doug Gilmore and Grant Fuhr were engaging and entertaining. And the live auction was fantastic. They raised more money than they've ever raised before in the course of the dinner. 1,800 people there. But by far, my favorite moment of the entire dinner happens sort of as some of the speeches were going on, some of the awards were being presented, and I had the opportunity to stand up, and I was walking away to check out some of the silent auction items up for bid and the rainbow auction
I know what you're
up
gonna say.
for bid. And Dave M comes towards me, and it's always great to see Dave M. We were very sitting close to each other, but I didn't have a real chance to chat with him at this point in time. Dave and I start talking, and all of a sudden I look down and I see that Dave's belt is completely wide open, like he's an old man finishing a hearty meal. He had to unbutton his pants and let the belt just hang loose. That to me was the absolute best part of the Rady dinner. I'm like, Dave, your belt is open.
You're flying
What's going
alone
on here?
Yeah, it had more to do with the fact that I'd gone to the washroom and forgotten to do up my belt. But regardless of those circumstances, thanks for throwing me under the bus, Drew. I will acknowledge that Drew did tell me in advance, the moment that after he advised me that the very belt I was wearing was unbuttoned, he did tell me that he was going to sell me out on today's show. So I'm not remotely surprised. I did get reminded. I could see where he was going when he brought that up and when he said the highlight of the day. I will say it was a lot of fun, and more importantly, Matty Leibel gave IC, made a little shot at Dave M, but I didn't care because over 1,800 people were hearing about Illegal Curve. He made one error though. He said we should just be known as the most popular Saturday morning hockey show in Manitoba. Period. That's it.
Radio show. He mentioned radio, but
I know
at the end of the day, we're a radio show at heart that has just transitioned to the StreamYard YouTube format, right? And
yeah,
hey, Dave, let's be honest, it helps. We were explaining to, I think it was Harvey Manouk. Shout out to Harvey Manouk, big fan of IC. He's probably going to be listening to this on the podcast. Matthew Leibel is my second cousin and also Drew's second cousin, so it helps that he's in our family, and it gives us
just for the record,
right?
I opposite sides of the family, so there's no relation whatsoever between Ginsburg and myself.
Drew and I have done a full ancestry.ca. Right. There is absolutely 0% chance Drew and I are. No, I'd like to think we're still brothers, Drew. I'd give you a hug right now if we were in the
Until
same
your
room.
Kids get married.
The best part was though Leibel speaking Dave about his hair, which is the funniest because he's always got a backwards hat on. But right. Yeah, I mean, just one thing about the Rady dinner, and then we can move on here. Matthew did. I got to echo what you said. He did an incredible job. It was a 5.5 hour night, almost 6 hours.
Yeah.
And he did an incredible job. And I still love. I'll just mention this quickly. I mean, Fewer, Gilmore, and Clark had some great stories. I just always love hearing about the Mike Keenan sending him home because he had too much weight, and then Grant Fewer playing 79 games. Like, I just love the fact that he's like, oh yeah, you think I'm a little too heavy? I've got 5 Stanley Cup rings and I'm going to play 79 games. Just love Grant Fewer has always been a favorite of mine. I got a chance to
my favorite
talk
part
to him
about that is that, to your point, Ezzy, about that story and how great it was that he played that many games. My favorite part about it is like, yeah, Keenan told me to lose weight, and I said, I'm not going to lose any weight. Are you crazy? I'm just going to go home.
Exactly. He didn't. I mean, the thing with Grant Fewer is like, it obviously worked for him with the multiple Stanley Cups. He's a hockey Hall of Famer, right? I just think, those guys played so well off of each other. We had Wendell Clark on around mid-April on this show, and he talked again about playing in Winnipeg at the old arena. Yeah. So, it was just a great time. Great to catch up with a lot of people. We mentioned Harvey Manouk sat at our table. We ran into a lot of friends there that, some of them we haven't seen in a while, some that we have seen recently. So it's always just a good night. If you ever get a chance to attend the dinner, there's really nothing like it in the city. No. There is nothing like that sports dinner. So if you ever have a chance, definitely support a good cause. And I'll mention, Zach Manouk told me this because I was covering it for the Jewish Post. They have raised over $1 million, close to around $1.1 million, which set a record. So $1.1 million for the Rady, which we know how much the Rady does in not just the Jewish community, the greater community. So just awesome.
It's important to note the Rady is a non-denominational non-denominational organization that contributes to everybody in the community, not just the Jewish community. So they do great work there at the Rady, and we're proud and pleased to be a small part of the efforts associated with the Rady JCC dinner.
Well, Dave's a big part. Me and you are just small parts, Drew.
Look forward to doing it again next year if they'll have us back. Moving back to the on ice, the Winnipeg Jets. I thought, Paulie Edmonds' comment there, and Paulie doesn't say things willy-nilly. He doesn't say things just, off the cuff and not have some veracity and some knowledge behind them. But his comment that he expects Brad Lambert to be a part of the Winnipeg Jets next year really stood out to me, Dave. I see that your eyebrows are going up as well. That to me was an interesting one, because in my fake depth chart, I don't know that I necessarily had him as assured of a spot. Now, there's no assurances, of course. If he doesn't end up performing, he won't earn it. But as we sit here today on June the 1st, they have him as a member of the Winnipeg Jets 12 forwards for next year. Was definitely an intriguing comment from Paul.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. And the comments from Craig Heisinger, if you didn't hear them on our Moose end of season roundtable, they're available on our YouTube show and our channel, and as are the comments from Mark Morrison, who talked about what Brad Lambert did. Again, not the offense. It was the defensive way he played. and you can hear Brad Lambert's assessment of his season as well. But to me, it's an interesting comment. I like we tend to think of the Jets as an organization that marinates players, takes advantage, and sometimes it's situational, right? Like, when you have a guy who's on an ELC and you can slide him down and it doesn't cause you to lose someone off the main roster, gives you that depth, they do take advantage of that. But if there's an opportunity here, and there's so much uncertainty, we don't know what the roster is going to look like, right? So if you don't re-sign Sean Monahan and you trade Nikolai Ehlers, then I can definitely see a world in terms of Brad Lambert, in terms of his being available to play in a top 6 role. If you retain Nikolai Ehlers, if you re-sign Sean Monahan, the big thing for me and the big question I have, because the point Paul made is that, you've got him as a winger. He sees him as a winger. And it's I'm not going to say the mistake, but it's the question I had with the Jets with Jack Roslovic.
It worries me too.
When the Jets had Jack Roslovic.
Dave, you should mention to those who don't know that Lambert played center for the Moose for the whole year.
No, I'm going to.
I'm not sure if you mentioned that. Yeah.
No. But it's worth that. That's what the point I was going to make is that. So you've got Jack Roslovic, the 2015 other second rounder, similar to Brad Lambert, right? At Boyce, 2022 other second first rounder. But the point is that Roslovic was a dominant center in the AHL, top 3 player, maybe top 1 player who was playing during his season, a couple seasons in the AHL, but he was one of the best players in the AHL. But he was a center, and then the Jets moved him. The organization made a decision, which I thought was a little unusual. They moved him over to the wing for I think a stretch of 10 games, and then suddenly he's up in the NHL and he's playing as a winger. Now remember, Jack Roslovic was somewhat seen as a potential heir apparent for Brian Little. Isn't it interesting? And I said this last week, 6 years later, you're still looking for a replacement for Brian Little. But the fact of the matter is that is something that this organization has been trying for some time, right? You've had Lowry and Scheifele as 1 and 3, but you need a true number 2 after Brian Little was, forced to retire. Although they were probably looking for it even when he was still playing, right, boys? So Brad Lambert comes in, has his season as a center with the Seattle Thunderbirds last year in junior, and then of course comes up and the Moose keep him as a center and he excels. And it helped him that he played with Jeff Malott, actually Austin Fielby, played with Parker Ford. So he had some good players, on his wing to help him develop. But to me, you've developed him, and again, the key to me is what Mark Morrison said about his defensive acumen, the way he used his speed and reset in the defensive zone, and the way he played defensively. And Zinger said the same thing. So those are the focus, is that he developed those skills that are necessary as a center in order to really play, a responsible role. And he likes playing up the middle. So again, you've got a player who naturally wants to play in that position. Now, again, boys, as we all know, like Nate Schmidt once told me about when he was in Washington and they said, can you play on the right side when the left side was completely locked up? And he goes, I'll learn, because that's what you do when you want to play in the NHL as opposed to playing anywhere else. So of course, Brad Lambert will go and play on the wing, and I'm sure he would excel as a winger. But I'm just saying it's curious that you're developing him as a center and in the American Hockey League, and then you're going to potentially move him to the wing. But if the need is the need, and you have you re-signed Sean Monahan, right? Then you're going to let
that's
Brad
a
Lambert
huge part of it, I think,
as a winger.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it, right? Like, it's one thing if he's playing center for a portion or all of next year with the Jets, but if the position he wants to play and the position he's really better suited for long-term, Dave, is center, then yeah, you got to give him that role, right? And I know we've gone back to this a lot, since the first round ended, but you look at the faith that Pete DeBoer has put in players like Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven.
Yeah.
Like, you can give young players an important role. And yes, the Dallas Stars happen to have Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Joe Pavelski, Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz. Like, they have a lot of these are all veterans at this point. I mean, obviously, Hintz and Robertson are a lot younger than Seguin, Benn, and Pavelski. But the point is, like, they've insulated Johnston and Stankoven with good veteran players, right? Yeah. Radek Faxa is another guy on the fourth line. Sam Steele is a 26-year-old on the fourth line, right? So, like, they've got a veteran. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Dallas is the oldest team in the league, right? But they've got Stankoven and Johnston, one of the oldest teams at the very least, right? James Myrtle, remember, he used to put out the
heaviest and oldest,
heaviest and tallest and all of that. But Dallas was for sure, at the very least, one of the older teams. But the point is, Brad Lambert is a unique situation because, as Dave has chronicled on illegalcurve.com on the show on the Moose Minute, I mean, Lambert played pro in Finland before he went and played in the WHL. So he doesn't actually just have 1 year of pro experience. Right? He's got multiple years of pro experience. So Brad Lambert is a unique situation. It's not apples and apples. Nikita Chibrikov is a different situation. I think you'd agree, Dave. Lambert is ahead of Chibrikov in terms of making that jump to the NHL, right? So, look, well, it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And I think Ehlers factors in here big time. Drew asked the question, right? Like, if Ehlers isn't here, let's say the Ehlers is traded for a defenseman, which could easily happen. They're like the Jets, we've talked about it. This could be their, Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat type of trade. Obviously, between Colorado and Buffalo, right? But I think that, there's definitely look, I think a year ago we'd be saying it's crazy to say that Brad Lambert could make the jump to the NHL this year. But based on how he tore up the AHL and how he played in that one game with the Jets, a small sample size, obviously, but I mean, he factors into the short-term plans of the Jets for sure.
Well, I mean, I mean, there's no question about it that if the decision is made to trade Nikolai Ehlers, and there's an if obviously associated with that, then Brad Lambert makes sense sort of as a natural replacement into that spot. You're putting him into a top 6 role. You're not trying to shoehorn him into a more of a checking role. You're going to play him with high-skilled players, be that Monahan and Perfetti or whomever it might be. I mean, obviously time would tell on that front. So it does logically make some sense. But, and that sort of, if the Jets do feel that he's ready for that elevated role, that gives them a little bit more probably comfort in potentially trading Nikolai Ehlers. Now, the Nikolai Ehlers question is certainly still going to be one that is out there until it's resolved, but you also need the Sean Monahan one. I mean, it's hard to believe, from my estimation, that if Monahan walks, let's say Monahan hits free agency, there's no agreement to be found with Monahan and the Jets, just immediately handing sort of that 2C role to Brad Lambert, and whether or not Adam Lowry would end up being the second line center and that line would play more, whatever, know what I'm saying.
Lowry at this point in his career is not a second line center, Drew.
Right. No, I'm not, but I'm saying they deploy that second line.
Yeah.
Like
Yes. But he's not going to be an offensive catalyst.
No. Definitely not. But they deploy that second line similar to how Rick Bowness did, deploying that second line, giving them the second most minutes. I mean, just immediately slotting Brad Lambert there is a bit of a high risk decision, I think, by the Winnipeg Jets.
No, Drew, and sorry to cut you off, but I think that opens the door for Cole Perfetti to return as the second line center, because you remember last year, Perfetti, I mean, of course, all Jets fans, but just to remind everybody, Cole Perfetti started the season as the second line center. It wasn't until maybe 30 to 40 games in, he switched to the wing.
No, it was less than that. It was way less than that. It was, Rick
he had the wrist injury, remember?
Yeah, so maybe 10, 15 games into the season.
Closer to that. Rick Bowness gave up on that pretty quickly. I mean,
so I think, look, I'm going to say one thing quickly here, because I know Brad Berry's coming up. I'm not sure how much time we have here, but
4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, so Cole Perfetti, I think I'm really high on Cole Perfetti. I really think he has like 70 to 80 point upside in the NHL. I really do think that. I think he had a rough year. I think he had the injury. I think it was understated how big of that impact that injury had on him. And I don't think he was going to talk about it a lot, or the team was going to talk about it a lot. But Dave, you could tell that he was dealing with that injury. And then it wasn't until late in the season, right? Rick Bowness mentioned it, I think, or kind of midway through the season. I think if I think if the Jets sign Monahan, by the way, I think they might have to overpay him a little bit. Then he would get elsewhere. I just think
that's usually what Winnipeg. Lately maybe not so much with Scheifele and Hellebuyck, I guess.
But I think Monahan, you'd have to I think there's going to be interest in Monahan. I think a lot of teams could see him as their second line center, right? So I think Monahan makes a lot of sense. But all I'll say is, if the Jets are unable to sign Monahan, Dave, I think that opens the door for Perfetti to be the second line center. And then maybe you have a second line with Brad Lambert on the wing with Cole Perfetti. And then, you figure out, I don't know, who's going to be the winger. I think you probably have to sign somebody in free agency to play on that second line, or you've got a guy like Nino Niederreiter or Vlad Nemesnikov. Even though I like Nino Niederreiter in that third line role, I think Lambert to have Lambert on the wing and Perfetti at center is realistic if they're unable to re-sign Monahan, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, I think you make an interesting point regarding Cole Perfetti and maybe going back and exploring the possibility of him as the second line center for the Winnipeg Jets, because it was a brief experiment last year. But, do the Jets reconsider that? I mean, and that's, because, at the start of training camp, that was the expectation. It didn't last long, but that was certainly the expectation that the Jets had. I believe that Brad Berry is set to join us now. I think he is here. Let's see if I can bring him in on the program yet. I'm not sure if he's actually, you know what? He's getting his camera set up. So we'll take an early break and then we'll come back with Brad Berry. That's what we'll do. It's a Saturday morning, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're live on our YouTube channel. Saturday morning, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show continues. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you, talking all about the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets, of course, have a new head coach in Scott Arniel. To talk about that hire, we're pleased to welcome to the program someone who knows Scott Arniel very well. The head coach of the North Dakota Fighting Hawks, Brad Berry, joins us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Brad, good morning. Welcome back to the program. How are things?
Yeah, good morning, fellas. Things are going great, and thanks for having me on today.
It's our pleasure to have you on. Brad, you played with Scott Arniel for all those years in Winnipeg. You coached with him for all those years with the Moose and with the Columbus Blue Jackets. When the news came out last Friday that he was officially getting hired as the Jets head coach, what was your reaction to that? Obviously, you're thrilled for your friend and everything else along those lines, but just sort of take us through your thoughts when that news officially happened last Friday.
Well, first of all, very excited for Scott. Obviously, well-deserved. And, I know he's built his body of work and his career over the last few years here. And, I was fortunate enough to be a part of that through the Manitoba Moose, coaching with him for a few years and then also in Columbus. But, he's ready for the opportunity again here. And I know he's learned a lot and been around a lot of really good coaches and a lot of good organizations here to set him up for success. And the guys in Winnipeg do an amazing job there with Chipper and Zinger and the rest of the crew and Chevy and those guys. So a lot of familiarity. I know he's pretty excited and pumped to be the next head coach there.
And Brad, I was going to ask you about Columbus, and one of those good coaches that he was around was yourself, right? you were an assistant coach with Scott in Columbus, and a lot of people, and obviously on this show we've talked a lot about the potential of Scott Arniel being named the head coach. And now obviously he has been officially named. And a lot of people point back to Columbus and they say, well, the record wasn't very good and everything like that. And, what I've always said, about that is that, that was first off, that was a younger team, but it was a team that, I remember, Rick Nash, obviously Vaclav Prospal, but it was a pretty top heavy team, right? Like you had quite a few young players there. I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, when you look back on those 2 years, what do you think Scott learned as a coach? Because he talked about that in his introductory press conference. And also, what did you learn as a coach? Because maybe if you can kind of blend those two together, because obviously you've gone on to a very successful career with the University of North Dakota. And now I think you're entering your 12th or 13th year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of great questions there and what you said. But, I think the first thing is, experience. Nothing takes the place of being, there and doing it for the first time and getting that experience. And, when Scott and I were together in Manitoba with the Moose, we had some very successful seasons there in the mid 2000s. And it was the American League. And for me personally, joining him then, coming from college hockey, those were two very impactful years that I had. I learned a lot as far as on the pro coaching side. And, both Scott and I played in the NHL and the American League and the IHL, but to get that experience, it's non-replaceable. And then when you take that next step to the NHL, which is the highest level of hockey that you can get to, as a coach, there are things that you learn as you go. And, I think Scott was very prepared, but I think there were situations too where I think he'd have to admit that, going through them for the first time, how do you deal with them? And us as coaches and as players, when their adversity hits, sometimes you always go, well, what could I have done better? What could I have learned from it? And I tell you what, I got to hand it to Scott. It didn't take very long after Columbus to, go back to the American League in Chicago and then obviously go to the Rangers and the Washington Capitals before he got back to Winnipeg. and be around unbelievable people. When you look at the guys that he ended up coaching with Peter Lavalette, with guys like Rick Bowness and guys like Alain Vigneault, you can do nothing but help to help you formulate a body of work to get your next opportunity. And here we are right now. So again, like I said, I think he's learned a lot from those days in Columbus, been around a lot of really good people, and I know he's going to have a lot of success going forward from all those experiences.
Brad, you touched on the time you guys spent in Manitoba with the Moose together, and that's part of what I wanted to touch on, was that importance of knowing, you both played in the AHL, the IHL, as did Scott later in his career, and then coached in that league. Just how important is it for a coach to have an understanding of what those guys' mentality is, so when they call up, you can be empathetic to them and what they're going through and have a knowledge of that league at the NHL level?
Well, the American Hockey League, and again, I just brought it up a few minutes ago. Like, to me, that was very impactful and formative for my coaching career here. And, getting to work with, obviously, God bless his soul, Rick Rippon and Alex Edler and Jason Jaffrey. And, there are a ton of guys that came through our program that went up to the Vancouver Canucks. And you get to see kind of how those young men grow exponentially at their time in the American League. And then you see them finally go up, and some guys stay and some guys come back, and how you deal with all that. And I think communication is the biggest thing, is having conversations and being transparent and being as communicative as you can. And again, I have a lot of respect for the American Hockey League, because I think there's not too many guys that don't go through that league to get to the NHL. There's a few elite players that don't touch the American Hockey League. But I'd say the majority does, and it's a very impactful stage, and not only for players, but coaches as well.
Brad Berry, University of North Dakota Fighting Hawks head coach, is our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Now, Brad, Scott in his introductory press conference on Monday talked a lot about learning as a head coach and developing as a head coach. Everybody, in all walks of life, they have core tenets that they believe and that they take with them from job to job or circumstance to circumstance. How important is it for a head coach to sort of take those core tenets, but at the same time learn to develop additional ones, or learn to build upon them with new experiences? And how much of a factor do you think that'll be for Scott Arniel to be successful behind the bench for the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, for sure. And I think our first time going from Manitoba to Columbus, there are situations that arise, and then how do you deal with them? And communication has to be the first and foremost part of being elite at that, and making sure that you cross every T and dot every I. And I firmly believe too that just making sure that you're on top of things from day to day. When things arise, you got to be communicative with not only your players but your staff, and then learn from it going forward here. So at the end of the day, like I talked about earlier too, after he left Columbus, he was around some successful organizations. I remember going out and watching, I think they were playing the LA Kings in the finals, in the Stanley Cup finals, with the Rangers and LA at one time. And just kind of watching how things, developed, in the course of that series, and learning from some of the coaches that he was around. And I think patience is a big thing. Scott's a very passionate guy. He's a fiery guy sometimes. And I think, even watching the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs with a guy like Chris Knobloch with, the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, there's a very patient guy, through all the ups and downs, and just making sure that, you get through those ebbs and flows, and being even keel and being patient. And I think he's learned a lot about the patient side of the game as well.
Brad, I wanted to ask you about the past year, and I realized that you're more hyper focused on the University of North Dakota, but I'm sure that you were following your friend Scott Arniel when he took over for Rick Bowness, when Judy, of course, had the unfortunate health issues, and then he had to take over for Rick a little bit later in the season. But when Scott Arniel took over, I don't quote me on the record, because these guys know that I often misquote, but I want to say that Scott kept the Jets going at like a 9-2-2 clip. And his overall record was really good when he took over for head coach when Rick was away from the team. Like, how much stock do you put in that? Because I think that speaks to the continuity of this organization, right? The Jets had 110 points last year, And I think, he did an amazing job. And you'd have to think that factored in big time to Chevy deciding to give Scott Arniel the head coach job with the Jets.
Well, yeah, you never know how it's going to go, but at the end of the day, when you got to be ready for that opportunity, whatever that looks like. And unfortunately, Rick being away on the health side of it, that was unfortunate, but it did give Scott an opportunity to come in and to help take over until Rick got back. But I just firmly believe that he was ready to do that. And I think a lot of times, like I just talked about drawing from the experiences of making sure that you're calm under pressure, knowing that the head guy is gone, and what are you going to do now to keep this ship going straight? And I know that Rick and Scott have a really tight relationship. Goes back a long ways to the old Jet days, to the Vancouver Canucks when we were in Manitoba, and V and Bones were in Vancouver, and having that relationship and being on the same page. And I think that's the key, is just making sure that you don't deviate from what you're doing, but now you got to make sure that you keep the rudder in the water, and you got to keep that ship going north, and you got to make sure that you're doing everything you can to help having success.
Brad, one of the things you talk about is that continuity, and that's a theme that was talked about on the Monday presser when Chevy was talking about the players and the sentiment from the players in the exit meetings about having Scott Arniel. So in terms of votes of confidence, how important is that from a GM and from a coaching staff to say, these players embraced playing under him and wanted to see him, if there was going to be a change, that he'd be given that opportunity?
Well, 100%, continuity is a big thing. And I watched the press conference here a few days ago too. And I really, like some of the things that were being said by Chevy and Arnie. And, one of the things that I picked up on too is the foundation of the program, in Winnipeg right now. Like, there's a strong foundation there. It's been built up, through, the last few years, and obviously Bones coming in, helping that out as well. And I think the last thing you want to do is, if you're having success, kind of maybe going on the outside and then bringing another message in, or bringing in something that changes that foundation. And, when things aren't going well, I think that's more likely to happen. But when you have a really strong foundation, and the seasons that they've had the last few years, and again, I think the ultimate goal, I know the ultimate goal is to win a Stanley Cup, but I think they're on the right track. And I think at the end of the day, of having the continuity of a coaching staff and guys have, played in Winnipeg, in that market, in the Canadian market, where there's a lot of pressure, and knowing what it takes is a huge deal. So I got to commend, the Jets, Chevy, Zinger, and Chipper for hiring Scott. And I do believe it's the right move.
The continuity is certainly important, Brad, but there's the transition from being the assistant head coach to the head coach. And it's something you've experienced back in 14-15, at the end of the 14-15 year at North Dakota. Dave Haxtell leaves. He goes and becomes the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. You take over and have been in that role ever since. So if Scott calls you up and says, Brad, what was the biggest difference in transitioning from assistant head coach to the head coach, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him regarding making that transition?
Well, we talk about that all the time. And I think, as the season progresses and things go, whether you're having success or whether you're going through adversity, be true to who you are, be who you are, do the things that have given you success in the past. And obviously, listening to the press conference with Scott, I thought he had a really good point about as the game changes, you have to change as well. You have to make tweaks and changes to your coaching style, but being true to your inner self on who you are. And, like I said, at the end of the day, when I took over, I'm not Dave Haxtell, and I'm not Dean Blaze, the guy that was before him. I'm Brad Berry, and these are the things that I think I can bring to the table that's going to help our program here, and being true to yourself. And I think that's the same when I talk to Scott, is he's not Rick Bowness. And at the end of the day, obviously you have similar philosophies and mentalities, but you got to be Scott Arniel, and you got to be true to yourself, and with the mindset of making changes and adapting as the game of hockey goes on in the future.
Brad, you mentioned that you tuned into the Scott Arniel press conference, and we were talking about this during the first hour of the show. I'm not sure if you caught any of it. We also had Paulie Edmonds on, and we were talking about it. The Jets organization and Scott Arniel mentioned that there's going to be a more of a focus on analytics for the coaching staff. And we all thought that was pretty interesting because, as some coaches and some people in the hockey world embrace it more than others. What is your kind of overall take on that? I mean, because it seemed like to us, that's always refreshing to hear, that even if a coach isn't looking at, every single spreadsheet and every single number, the fact that they're going to try to embrace that a little bit more in their coaching philosophy and coaching technique is just refreshing to hear a guy like Scott Arniel talk about that.
Well, absolutely. It's a way of life right now. And, I know down here in North Dakota, there's so many software programs and different things that you can buy into or whatever. And we have 2 or 3 different sources. And for me, I think it's the way that right now that you're trying to accentuate or help your organization going forward. And, you can get pretty caught up into that, and you can maybe get pretty negative sometimes on what that looks like. But I think you gotta filter it to I guess your needs, what you're looking for. And I think those are the things that you want to do, is you want to keep doing the things you're doing well through the analytics. But it's kind of refreshing to know of some of the things maybe you miss as a coach through video that you need to work on. Whether it's D-zone coverage or entries or exits or whatever that is, that these analytics just kind of jump out and pop out at you where you need to try to get better at. And I think that's the way it is right now. And again, if you have the tools and the capabilities, why not? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just going to help you.
Brad, I was reading in the Grand Forks Herald that you're going to be coaching against a guy named Bowerberry in a couple of years. So what's that like? What's that going to be like for you when your son is going up against you playing for St. Thomas?
Well, first of all, I'm proud of him for being who he is and standing on his own. He's come a long way. He's playing in the USHL in Muskegon, and he's fortunate enough to get an opportunity to accept a scholarship at St. Thomas. And it's going to be a little awkward, I guess, a little bit at first. But at the end of the day, I know he really wanted to play here at North Dakota, but him and I, really close relationship, and just talking a little bit about what the dynamic looks like when you have a player in the locker room and your dad's the head coach, and what does that look like? And I, just talking through it, he understood, and he wanted to carve his own path, and he went through a recruiting process that was pretty patient. And, at the end of the day, when he committed, the next day or the 2 days later, they were announced coming into our league. So I know his mother was excited. I know that he's going to be close to home, but I know that his mother's going to be cheering for him, and probably not North Dakota when we're playing against each other.
The mother's love is stronger than the bond between a husband and wife in that case. Yeah. Brad, we'll let you go on this last question. I have to ask it. I apologize for putting you on the spot. There's 2 vacancies behind the Winnipeg Jets bench.
Oh,
no. Any
Brad
thoughts,
knew that was coming,
interest?
Drew. He knew it was coming.
I know he knew it was coming.
You know what? I would be honored and privileged to try maybe sometime again to be part of the Winnipeg Jets organization. But you know what, guys, I think Scott deserves to look outside, and I think that Scott deserves to hire maybe somebody that's been around the NHL game in most recent years to help him out. Again, I feel like I could help and do that. But you know what, guys, I feel like I'm the head coach of the 33rd NHL team here in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Yeah.
We got Ingolstadt Arena, we got resources here, we got elite players coming through our program. I love what I'm doing, and I love the fact that I feel like I'm back in the American League again, helping these young guys try to get to your level. And again, feel privileged. But again, I never say no. But at the end of the day, I'm happy what I'm doing here for now.
I got one more. Sorry. Okay. And Drew did have to ask it because a lot of people saw that you were coming on the show, and a lot of people know that you were the assistant under Scott in Columbus. So
and Manitoba.
Yeah, apologies, and the Moose, of course. So apologies to Drew. But I wanted to ask you one question because I come down to Grand Forks every year. Shout out to our buddy Kyle Kozier and the Kozier family who live in Grand Forks. So I come to one UND at least game a year. Saw that Max Swanson from Alaska won Junior Player of the Year. So just wanted to get your opinion on that because obviously UND has no shortage of good players like Jackson Blake, Jason Blake's kid, had a phenomenal season. But Max Swanson, I mean, how excited are you for him to get on your team, and just overall how I know that it's the summer and you're trying to enjoy the summer weather, but how excited are you already getting for next year and kind of the incoming freshman crop?
It's funny because, when the season ends and, we had a really good, strong season here, and we didn't get to the final game of the college hockey season, but, obviously we're going to be trying to do that next year. But having a guy like Max Swanson, that was the USHL Player of the Year, and I think you just got named the National Junior Player of the Year in the U.S. here is phenomenal. A great young player, guy that competes extremely hard as ultra high skill level. He's going to help our group immensely here, and you always wonder how that's going to happen. right away, playing against guys that are 21, 22, 23 years old here in college hockey. But you know what? He's done it for 2 years at the USHL level. We're excited. There's a couple other guys that are going to be draft picks this year, high end. Sasha Beauvert from Muskegon, Michigan. He's from Quebec, coming in our group. He's an elite player. And EJ Emery, a defenseman at the National Development Program. Like, we've got some high end kids coming in, and we've got a lot of really good returning players as well here. So it should be an exciting year for us.
It absolutely will be. It's a great program you're running there in Grand Forks, Brad.
Absolutely.
We always appreciate your time and insight. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and we look forward to catching up with you again.
Well, thanks again. Very grateful and privileged to be on. And again, there's an open invite for all you to come down. If you guys ever want to come down and watch a game or be around, we'd love to have you host you down here. So
I can assure you, we will take you up on that offer, and then you will.
We'll see you at Caribou Coffee, Brad, or maybe Chick-fil-A.
There you go.
Thanks, Brad. Take care.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
Brad Berry joining us this morning. Great guest. He's been on with us a number of times over the years.
Culver's as well is a personal favorite. I know you like Culver's Butterburgers.
I'm well aware that you know how to do the fast food tour of Grand Forks like nobody else, and that's a skill set that very few possess, and you embrace and you draw and you build upon it year over year.
I love getting my sweatpants ready to go to Texas Roadhouse.
Well, if you need to just loosen the belt, Dave M can show you how to do that based on
If he's wearing a belt on sweatpants, we need to have another conversation.
Oh my God, that's a great idea. Has anybody invented that? A belt for sweatpants?
It's called,
or just a regular belt, I guess you could use.
Yeah, just maybe a regular belt. Anyways, Brad Berry is a great guest.
Yeah.
And I thought his answer there was pretty interesting. Regarding the assistant coach, I had to ask it. He knew that it was going to come.
Yeah,
that's
of course
part and parcel with coming with on the program. We asked the hard hitting questions, as you all know, but he really does
ask him what his favorite restaurant was in Winnipeg, but that's a pretty good one as well, Drew.
He really does have a great program down there in North Dakota. Just one of the premier teams, one of the premier organizations in college hockey, and certainly the finest arena in college hockey.
Drew knows how important college sports are in the U.S. Obviously, shout out to Kentucky.
Thank you.
You go down there, and we've all gone down there. I went down there with the family last October. Like, everybody gets into University of North Dakota hockey games. Like, you're walking around Grand Forks, and then like, if you've never had a chance to go see a game, it's not the easiest ticket to get, by the way.
No.
But like, if you have a chance, I mean, it's so much fun. And like the arena,
the student section
the student section, it's so
awesome.
much fun. It really does kind of have an NHL feel. And obviously there's other
NHL arena.
Look at this.
Yeah, it's what is it, 11 or 12,000? It might even be more than that. Might be 15. I don't know.
Yeah,
but if you ever have a chance to go see a UND game, I highly recommend it. And it's what, an hour and a half drive, hour and 45 minutes to go to Grand Forks. You do a little shopping at Target, Nordman's. You get a couple new pairs of slacks, Drew.
When was the last time you bought a new pair of slacks?
Actually, the slacks and the sweatpants. Who knew that? As he wore so many.
I actually did buy a new pair of sweatpants and a new pair of slacks.
It's actually amazing, kids.
Because my old ones had mustard stains all over them.
It's pretty amazing. He's talking about pants, considering you walked into my house without any.
The question is, was he wearing shorts though?
No,
just
okay,
undies.
just completely
Tidy
gave up
whities.
on it altogether. Anyways, great to catch up with Brad. So we encourage everyone, in case you missed any of that, to tune in and get it on the podcast or on the YouTube replay. The off-season questions for the Winnipeg Jets continue. They've obviously got the head coach down. But, as Mike and Ken talked about in today's Winnipeg Free Press, and Murat and had one of his articles about the sort of the Jets fan survey sort of thing going on in the Athletic as well. We are now 1 month away from July 1st. So you're going to start to see, I think, some of the moves get made ahead of July 1st, because you don't want to get to that free agency date and not have resolution regarding Sean Monahan, not have resolution about Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon. You at least want to have, I think, one of them in
DeMello's one that I'm honestly the most curious about.
Yeah,
because I really like DeMello, and I think everybody agrees. Like, DeMello has been such a perfect partner for Josh Morrissey,
right?
And I think he could play with Dylan Sandberg as well, Dave. Like, he's the type of guy that I just have so much respect for DeMello,
and I think his stock is increasing. I think that if you sort of, if you look around, you read online and you read check in on some of the buzz and everything
I think
else.
he was listed as like one of the top 5 UFAs right now.
Right. Like it's not the Dylan DeMello that could have been had for free in the expansion draft. I think people around the league.
Drew loves going back to that. It's true,
Well,
though.
I mean, I still find it to be completely
it's absurd. It's absurd that he was not protected.
Right. But, but I think the league is maybe cluing in to just how valuable a guy like Dylan DeMello is in providing that safety net, that comfort level. And really that's why I think he's even more, he's so important for the Winnipeg Jets, who have so many questions on the right side of their defense. But he's one that I think in hindsight, they probably should have tried to get something done earlier.
Well, that's why I'm curious about what's going on there, Drew, because if you're a guy like Dylan DeMello, at the very least, don't you want to test what's out there?
A month away,
I think somebody might offer him. I kind of said a couple of weeks back, I said he's kind of around 4 to 4.5. I think he might be now closer to 5 now that I think about it.
Again, you're not just for the, 5's a lot of money, but you're you know what? Once you get to July 1st, there you go. CMAC put it up there. Dylan,
thank you, CMAC. CMAC. Me and CMAC. I mean, great minds think alike. Like, it's $5 million, but what is
CMAC is 10 years old.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't think so. But have we ever met CMAC in person? I don't know if we've met CMAC, but we should. We should take CMAC out for a beer because he's always got great comments. But I think that 31 years old, 4 years, $5 million a year. I don't think that's an overpay. I really don't.
But look at the Winnipeg Jets without him. I mean, obviously it weakens your right side. It weakens Josh Morrissey as a defensive unit, I believe. I mean, the problem for the Jets' perspective is you're now 1 month away from free agency. If you want him to sign, I think you probably have to, pony up a little bit more than you would have had to do 6 months ago, 3 months ago. His value is increasing as an asset. And that means it's going to cost the Winnipeg Jets or whomever is going to cost them a little bit more money than it was going to a little while ago. But, look at this Jets defense. Take him off of there. No Dylan DeMello. Boy, oh boy, oh boy,
it's
oh
weak.
boy.
It's a weak right side with Dylan DeMello.
Right?
And all due respect to Neil Pionk and Nate Schmidt, but these guys are their ceiling at the NHL level is second pair defensemen. I think you would argue both of those guys, the numbers indicate those guys are third pair defensemen, right? And I think Nate Schmidt, by the way, is an excellent third pair defenseman. I've said this. I think, if I'm the Jets GM, I'm looking to move Neil Pionk and maybe throwing him in a Nikolai Ehlers trade, and I'm keeping Nate Schmidt for the third pair. I think, Ville Heinola and Nate Schmidt as a third pair, I think that's going to be a pretty damn good third pair. I also think that, Nate Schmidt, his personality and what he's meant for that dressing room, I realize a lot of people, those intangibles, some people dismiss, but I think Nate Schmidt is a really well-liked guy. And I also don't think, that contract is going to be very easy to move, guys. So, and I don't think you want to, it's not the Jets style, I think, to buy him out. So I think I'm and even if Nate Schmidt is your 7th defenseman, right, then you probably have the best 7th defenseman in the league. So anyways, I do think
overpaid 7th defenseman. That's
well,
for
sure. But he can't do anything about that, right? That contract was signed before he became a member of the Jets,
that's
right?
No fault of his own.
Look, I think the right side, Drew, going back to your point, that has to be priority number 1. I think signing Sean Monahan is maybe priority number 2. But priority number 1 to me is lock up Dylan DeMello. And if you're not locking up Dylan DeMello, I think you have to trade Nikolai Ehlers for a right shot defenseman.
Yeah, yes. Look at your.
What other moves do you have? Elias Salomonsson, Dave, is not coming in to be a top pairing defenseman. His ceiling next year is, I think, gets big minutes with the Manitoba Moose. That's his ceiling. Maybe he gets a cup of tea in the NHL, but I don't think you're putting Elias Salomonsson into your top 6 next year. Am I wrong?
I was going to say for Tico Napoli's benefit that you throw Tyrell Bauer in, but since Tico Napoli's not here, and we've already mentioned Bauer Barry, then I'm not going to mention Tyrell Bauer. So no, look, I think that Elias Salomonsson did a lot of really good things in the SHL last year, including winning a championship with the Schlefka, but I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I didn't watch any of the games. So while I read reports that he was doing really well, we'll see what training camp looks like. He was, of course, one of the last guys cut from training camp last year before he was assigned to the Moose briefly before.
Look how many. Sorry, Dave. I just want to say this quickly. Look how many years the Jets have developed a first-round pick in Ville Heinola in the AHL, and you're going to tell me Elias Salomonson's going to come in here, and then all of a sudden he's just going to leapfrog Ville Heinola, and he's going to go into the top 6.
Well, I mean, it's also need though, right? Because Elias
different sides. He's playing the right
side guy, not a
when
left.
has a defenseman ever, including Josh Morrissey, no defenseman has ever just come over from Sweden or come out of junior hockey, and then all of a sudden you just put him in the NHL.
No, you're T. Conopoli is here, so I can mention Bauer. No, there's no question about it, Ezzy. He's not doing it, and I 100% agree with you. I think we've how long have we been talking about it on the show during the season? Now, like the right side is the more disconcerting side right now for the Winnipeg Jets, based on the uncertainty. Because if you can, folks can pillory Dylan DeMello all they want and say he's not a top pairing defenseman. That's fine, but if you don't have Dylan DeMello on that right side, and you've got Neil Pionk and Nate Schmidt, and maybe you're forcing one of your other guys to move from the left to the right, it's weak. It's not great. So that's definitely an area of need. Obviously, we're going to have to address it next week. The two things I'm going to shoehorn in here because I think it's notable. They're talking about assistant coaches. Rumor has it that the Moose are going to be looking for an assistant coach because Nolan Baumgartner.
Put on your antlers. It's time for the Minute Moose Minute on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
There's two things I forgot to do. I forgot to remove the Rady ad, and I forgot to remove Ezzy's access to that button.
Anyways,
you don't mess around when my hand's on the trigger button.
Yeah, there we go. Running Man's calling it a Moose Minute time. Well, I'll just quickly say that it looks like the reports have been the last few days that Nolan Baumgartner, who's the assistant coach in Manitoba the last 2 seasons, that he could be joining Travis Green's staff over in Ottawa. He was an assistant coach with him in Utica when they were the Canucks farm team, and he was also an assistant coach with him for the Vancouver Canucks. So seems very likely he and Mike Yeo are rumored to be joining the staff in Ottawa. So it looks like the Moose may be looking for a new assistant coach. And the other thing I wanted to mention, 2020 5th rounder Anton Johannesson, his draft rights are expiring today at 4 or 5 p.m. So if the Jets don't offer the 5'9" left shot defenseman,
who is Dave talking about?
Hey, I guarantee if you ask the chat, they'll know who I'm talking about. It's not my fault that you guys aren't paying attention. That was a 2020.
Don't say you guys. I didn't say anything. I just
Hey,
laughed at these
use guys. I think he said use guys. Youse. Use guys.
You cackled along with Ezzy, so you were endorsing his
something
comments.
funny. It doesn't happen all the time that I can laugh when Ezzy makes a joke.
But anyways, so their exclusive signing rights for him expire as of 4 or 5 p.m. tonight. So I don't expect him to be offered a contract. He was a very small, mobile defenseman, from the Swedish league. So he'll most likely, go into becoming a free agent.
There you go. Two things I wanted to mention before we wrap up. There's an article in The Athletic today about Jacob Julian, the Winnipeg Jets.
Featured on illegalcurve.com.
There you go. You can read it on the website. The 2023 5th round pick, Jacob Julian, playing for the Memorial Cup. There's an article about him in The Athletic. So if you want to check that out, go to illegalcurve.com.
London's in the final versus Saginaw.
Yes, exactly right. I thought it was a good article by our friend Scott Wheeler. He wrote that one, so you can check that out. And of course, I want to give a shout out to Scott Burnside, who's been a frequent guest here on the show. It was announced yesterday that he is going to receive the Elmer Ferguson Memorial Award for Excellence in Hockey Journalism from the Hockey Hall of Fame. So Scott has been a guest on the show many times. Congratulations to him.
Right on.
Equal congratulations to Pierre Hood, who has covered the Montreal Canadiens for so many years. He's getting the Foster Hewitt Memorial Award for outstanding contributions as a hockey broadcaster. So congratulations to them both.
Scott Burnside said if Atlanta gets an expansion team, he can stay with them. So
that's true. He did.
Yeah. So shout out to Scott Burnside. Yeah, he's an excellent journalist.
He'll retire long before that, so he doesn't have to put up with us. I can assure you about that. Big thanks to all of you for joining us this Saturday morning here on the program. Big thanks to our sponsors, Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, Grid Park, Linden Market Dental Center, Zappia Group Realty, Betway, Tough Duck, Boston Pizza, and Seagram. Support these fine businesses for their continued support of Illegal Curve hockey. It's been a fun one. In case you missed any of it, the interview with Paul Edmonds, the interview with Brad Barry, they're going to be available on the podcast edition of the show. That'll be up sometime soon. And of course, the instant replay on the YouTube channel will be up as soon as I press end the broadcast.
And
Thanks
you might see
all of you.
pop-up assistant coach show coming up soon, right?
There you go. Big deal. Well, obviously, for all the latest Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose news, illegalcurve.com is constantly being updated. We'll pop up as needed, but we'll be back, of course, next Saturday morning with another edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Whatever you do it safe. For Dave Manouk, for Ezra Ginsburg, I'm your host, Drew Mandel. If it's Saturday, it's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from Illegal Curve Hockey. For more great Illegal Curve content, subscribe to the Illegal Curve YouTube channel, follow at Illegal Curve on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit your online home for hockey in Winnipeg, illegalcurve.com.